Huh, a tweet from DriveThruRPG. Announcement is great, it's awesome. Oh, right. It's Twitter. Go down to the comments.
True. You and the rest of the current publishing infrastructure have every reason to be terrified.
Surely you could sell the PDFs on the blockchain. That's a perfect use. We could all port our licenses in those crypto wallets and store it on 1,000 machines rather than a nice, secure, centralized server.
Grow or die. Adapt or perish. Okay, but what about a game within your system using NFTs?
Oh, these people with their NFTs, holding a burning hot potato in their hands that's just roasting away their flesh, trying to tell you that feels great. But does it really feel great, or do they just want you to catch it for them? So I'm a long-standing member of this fairly large online D&D community, around 50 people. Every summer, we get together to play a 3 to 5 week-long play-by-post game with several DMs working together and a team of mods. My usual role, to help accommodate parties of 10 plus at a single time. We all build off of the same homebrew lore and world from the year previous, mostly in the form of callbacks. Well, myself, my fiance, and some friends decided to take up the mantle and run a slightly smaller spin-off game in the off-season, which went well, except when this one guy, a DM of the last summer game, we'll call him Fish, rage quits when facing consequences of turning another player into a werewolf and simply leaves the game and deletes everything he said in it. I have been in this community longer than Fish, but he has a closer relationship with the person who started the group, so he thinks he is owed a whole lot of social power. Fish also has an issue addressing people who are simply not a cis man, constantly needing to be corrected. He is also awful at homebrewing, by the way. Alright, here's the issue. When I reflected on how well the game I DM'd for went compared to the last summer game, which I had some problems with, I gave a suggestion to the group about how to help run the game smoother as a whole, simply offering my player/mod/DM perspectives. I always say context is key, but luckily OP did drop this horrible message that infuriated and enraged that guy, so let's see what it is. So I've read through it, and it looks pretty civil. As you can see here, it's just stuff about people not keeping secrets from each other. Specifically, DMs not keeping secrets from each other, which, yeah, no duh, that is really important, especially if you're running a joint game. So let's see how that guy responded. Well, Fish is one of the head DMs for the next game, and he just snapped. He started to publicly and openly criticize me, and was aggressively telling me I was wrong. He also refused to use my tag/name, and constantly referred to me as she when I was actively in the conversation. I tried to remain neutral and civil through it all, and eventually others stepped in to defend me, but Fish just wouldn't let it go, constantly using ad hominem and strawman fallacies, and was hearing but refusing to listen. Someone even called him out for insulting me, something very much against server and community rules/guidelines. In the end, he gave up on trying to simply tell me and those who stepped in to support me that I was wrong. He quit talking, and a few hours later left all the servers related to this game and community and just blocked me. A few people messaged me saying they respected how cool-headed and direct I was, and I'm very happy with the support of this group. Fish also straight up hates my fiance for some dumb reasons, so he probably took out a lot of that anger on me. Ah yes, a masterful rendition of how not to handle criticism. Yes, getting criticized can hurt, but screaming and yelling like a petulant child when somebody simply sends you a message over Discord about a D&D game, probably one of the most impersonal things someone can do, well, it's silly. And I'm glad that OP had a community to back her up, because not everyone has that. But rest assured, DMs out there or players, if you get criticized and you disagree, that's okay, but make sure that your response is civil, or no one is going to listen to you. I was playing in an online 5th edition game that was advertised as having a focus on realism. The DM and party seemed nice, and in our session 0, the DM said that he was going for a more realistic game, but that no classes or races would be restricted. He said that he did have a few homebrew rules, but that he would get to them when they came up, as he wanted us to discover them organically, alright? The game starts with the party arriving in a town in search of work. Things immediately got off to a bad start, as we came to understand what real realism meant to this DM. For starters, every, and I mean every, NPC was not only gleefully described by the DM as being covered in mud and shit, but were also all assholes to the party for no reason. A common exchange when we tried to purchase something went like this.
What do you want arrows for, killer?
To, kill things? That's what arrows are for. Why are you selling them if they're so bad?
I don't need to explain myself to you.
Apart from that, we also saw the welcome sight of a young girl being burned at the stake for the crime of practicing magic. Turned out magic was illegal in this kingdom, which the DM had just happened to omit from detail. After spending an hour looking for any sort of plot hook from stonewalling NPCs, we eventually find out that there was an abandoned mine nearby that was taken over by goblins. We figure that maybe these villagers are hostile to outsiders out of fear, and figure reclaiming their mine might make them more amicable to us. We joked that maybe it would make everyone stop being an asshole, to which the DM replied that not everyone was like that. So, in our first encounter with the goblins, the DM reveals his custom injuries table. See, most lasting wounds apply effects on a crit. This DM, however, not only had almost every critical hit result in dismemberment of some sort, but even just being hit would give the player a 50% chance of the wound getting infected and them dying within a couple of days unless the wound was treated immediately, which was exceedingly difficult because, again, I will remind you, healing magic is illegal. We somehow managed to kill the goblins, with our paladin losing a hand in the process and going unconscious, and make off with a meager amount of loot the goblins had occurred. As soon as we exit the mine, however, the entire town's villagers are present, as well as the local lord and his knights, who demand that we give them the gold we'd looted, saying that we stole it. We're all tired of all these asshole NPCs at this point, so we refuse. Combat ensues with the DM snickering that it sure would be useful to use your spells right about now, as our wizard and druid had been stuck up until this point using their standard weapons to try and at least do something. They didn't take the bait and kept on their subpar actions. Somehow we managed to crit this lord twice and cut off both his legs, to which this lord not only doesn't have to make any con saves, but just calls the party outlaws and criminals and gallops away. Legless. When we complained about this, the DM says, he's a trained warrior from birth. He can withstand wounds. Again, he got both his legs cut off. The peasant mob disperses after we give them all our money, and the party collectively decide to leave the kingdom, saying that everyone was an asshole, to which the DM again protests that not everyone was, even though we had only ever interacted with jerks. After the DM tries everything to get us to stay in this land, saying there's bandits on the road, we wouldn't know anything about the surrounding area, our characters would want to stay. The DM finally relents as we just pick another random direction and just start walking. The session ends, and 2 days later, the DM says on the party server that he decided it would be most realistic for the party to have caught and died from the flu while traveling cross-country, and because they died, we had to roll new characters. We all tell the DM to go screw himself, and he pastes paragraphs of text telling us we are bad players for not appreciating and understanding how bad things really were back then. We all left as the DM was midway through his diatribe. TLDR, DM thinks realism equates to mugcore and everyone being assholes. Look, if you want to run a realistic game, that's awesome, but remember, as I said in the previous video about red flags, one of the most, and actually, not one of, the most important thing when playing Dungeons & Dragons is to make sure that everyone's having a good time. If people are enjoying a gritty, hardcore, realistic game with injury tables, diseases, food requirements, etc., that's great, but people need to be enjoying it. If people aren't enjoying that, then, well, you should probably find either a different group or run a different game, because making sure that you and your party are having a good time, that is top priority. I don't understand how this DM gets a good time out of this specifically. It seems very restrictive in terms of how creativity can be run, and I do like how he uses disease as basically a don't go that way tool, really maximizing the fun of his D&D game. Well done. To set the scene, I've only been playing 5th edition for about 4 to 5 years sporadically, and I've consumed a great deal of online content, such as Critical Role and Acquisitions Incorporated. So, I have a moderate amount of knowledge, not enough to run my own game comfortably, but enough to help brand new players at the table. A few years back, we had a weekend getaway with a few other couples plus some friends at a beach house, and myself and my girlfriend's, now wife's friend, was bringing along her new boyfriend, and he was gonna DM a game for newbies to experience Dungeons & Dragons. I was crazy excited to have someone help bring my wife into the fold, and we could share in this pastime. His word in the group chat was, "Don't worry, I'm a top-tier DM who runs multiple campaigns, and I can cater to any skill level. It'll be no worries." This was backed up by our friend, emphatically. Okay, sounds good. Side note, DM and friend met during a campaign he was running. He proceeded to cheat on and then leave his wife, who was in the campaign with them, for this friend. It was super messy. Anyway, fast forward to the evening of the game, drinks had been had and food had been cooked and we're ready to settle in. He's asked if everyone has their character sheets ready. Half the table didn't because they didn't know how to do that.
I can't believe you guys would be so unprepared. You really are new to this, huh?
Okay. We spent the next 45 minutes building characters for everybody. Finally, we start the campaign. He's given a little backstory and started all of us off in a tavern. You know, the usual shtick, and given the rough outlines of a basic intro campaign. Hunt this, kill that, explore this hidden temple, you know, etc. At this point, our new players have been given very little to no guidance on how the game mechanics actually work. So the more experienced players will be doing most of the talking, perception/skill checks, etc. to show our new companions how things are done in the game. Even I could see our newbies' interest was waning. At this point, DM's done nothing by the way of guidance to our new players. No exploration on what the skills do or what options are available to them in any given scenario, or even, "You could try doing this." Nothing except snarky comments like,
"Well, what do you think X stat means? Come on, it's not rocket science."
All the while mooing over his girlfriend's character. Turns out she was reusing the same character from the campaign they were previously running with his now, ex-wife. His favoritism became more and more blatant, passing her skill checks with minimal rolls. I'm seriously talking rolling like 2 or a 3 and then still passing. All the while not assisting the new players in understanding what their characters were capable of. If I recall correctly, she was also the only one to get DM whispers even when others passed perception/insight checks with natural 20s, though now in hindsight, I don't think I want to know what he was whispering into her ear. This all culminated in a rather craptacular experience for the new players, being rather excluded from the game and frustrated because there were long periods of silence as he refused to throw our new players a bone, unless of course it was his girlfriend. I could only do so much as I wasn't by any means an expert. Plus, I'd never even played most of the archetypes they'd rolled, so most of my assistance was guesswork. The damage was already done. No one except DM's girlfriend was having any fun, and people started leaving the table. The game was a disaster, and my wife had zero interest in the game anymore. While wrapping it up, he said words that made me quite mad, and also clicked to what was really going on.
"Well, when I run these campaigns in the shop, my players normally do much better. Guess it's not a game everyone can be good at."
Dude was tilting the table to feed her ego, which in turn she would reciprocate back by telling him how good of a DM he was. We all left them at the table to go inside, pour more drinks, and fire up some party games on the PS4, and sadly, despite me telling my wife that D&D was not that experience, she's had no interest since. We're also no longer friends with the pretentious asshats. This absolutely sucks. I've only ever run D&D games with new players, or players who have only ever played with me. And, well, I think it's really important to make sure the game is enjoyable for them. Even years into our time together as a D&D group, every single game I ask for any criticism, anything at all, to help them have more fun, because I think it's so important to help them to have fun, to help them enjoy and love this game. I mean, I can't imagine what would happen if I ran my first game and it was an absolute disaster. Oh, wait, my first game was an RPG Horror Story.
Crap.
Okay, but we made it through that, and since then, we've had a great game. And since then, I've learned my lesson. I need to make sure that my players are having a good time. Talk to them, communicate with them. This DM clearly didn't care about that. All he cared about, well, he cared about simping, which I guess you gotta respect the grind? Actually, on brief second thought, no, you definitely don't. This was a decade ago, and it was my first time playing D&D. I was underage, but was allowed a level of independence as long as I got home by curfew, and I had a few older friends. One of these friends was a woman in her late 20s who pursued other ways to get validation because she felt like she'd thrown away her youth, marrying her husband right away at 18. So, we already know this is going to go well. I should have also mentioned that she'd already several times had been incredibly strange to me about personal aspects of my life, but I thought she was cool because she talked about nerdy stuff and had a job. I know. She played D&D with a group of men in their 40s, and when I joined, there was one other person even remotely close to my age, a girl who had just turned 19 the month before. Honestly, a lot of my memory from this time is foggy. I have CPTSD, not from this, but from before this, and so my memory either latches onto things or just kind of makes them murky. It's fun. Anyway, what I do remember before the scene that is seared into my brain is that 1. The DM would only play 3rd edition because he hated anything after that, and he was very particular about what 3rd edition content he played. He had also had a very specific set of homebrew rules and features that he passed out sheets for and specifically wanted us to play with. He also tried to get free art from anyone with artistic talent from the group for his homebrew for, free. 2. He tried to encourage us, the 3 players who weren't 40-year-old men, to play women, and he wanted us to dress up and LARP as our characters, including getting pictures of the woman in her 20s dressed as her character in this really tiny dress with a very specific type of heel shoe. He specifically liked taking pictures of her tiny feet. I should mention, the woman in her 20s was a very small woman, under 5 feet, who looked a lot younger than she was because of some medical condition she had. The 19-year-old and I were both too uncomfortable to dress up, and he'd still comment on our shoes, so I stopped wearing anything open-toed, like sandals, and I think I remember that the other girl did as well. 3. The other men in the group would ask to keep the pictures he took and often bring their own material for her to model of certain fantasy clothing or races. They claimed they were posting it onto some fantasy site, and she was hoping if they posted enough, she might be hired to model for fantasy shoots. Yeah, I don't know, but I remember that it made me incredibly uncomfortable, and I was also aware that she hid that she did this from her husband, who, by the way, I thought was a piece of garbage, but I still found it weird and tried to talk to her about it. There's a reason our friendship didn't last, and this is one of those reasons. I can't remember specific details, and in fact, a lot of random blurs in my memory I have around these events, including the men in the group wanting to be very physical for LARPing, or whatever. They were just very unpleasant in general, and have created a weird inability for me to easily retain information for playing D&D, especially 3rd edition. I have recently started to try and get into 5th edition after a few failed attempts to keep anything I read on it, so it's been an interesting and weird experience. I know it sounds dramatic to have triggers associated with it, but this is 1, not the only thing correlated to my memory, and 2, there are things I won't discuss about this group that can be inferred, but it was unpleasant. And what led me to leave this group, and I'm very glad I did, was when we ran into a group of sirens, and the DM used it as a weird attempt to convert my gay character, and I do mean that, by the way. I was playing a gay man. I refused to play a woman at this table, and I was gay myself. In fact, my table was aware that I had recently gotten my first girlfriend. The woman in her 20s had informed them without consulting me. Although that topic was one I refused to discuss with them, their questions were invasive and uncomfortable. I should point out that at this time, my mother had just recently learned I was gay, and the topic of conversation was one that I was already sensitive to. And he decided, after several attempts to have NPCs/enemies charm or seduce my character when they were women, to my extreme discomfort, to take our party past a shore that had several sirens on it. Sirens, he tried to assert to me, were affecting my character so intensely that not only was he charmed, but it was actually changing how his brain worked and making him permanently attracted to women? The 19-year-old girl was quietly and uncomfortably supporting me, and my 20-year-old quote-unquote friend was unperturbed by this entirely. I got upset. I regret how emotional I was, but honestly I find it hard to remember Everything he said, I remember him and the others treating me like I was an idiot, and him agreeing to redact that, and then he just did some spell or some other crap, it was honestly a blur, to force my character to become a woman by changing his body, which he argued would still keep him being gay. I fell silent. I barely engaged after that. I never came back to that party. I feel bad for leaving the 19-year-old behind, to be honest. I still resent the older friend I had because she had tried to convince me to go back after that and acted like I was being a killjoy for being upset. Now I just find it kind of pathetic. A woman over 10 years my senior telling me to go back to a group of 40-year-old men who thought it was appropriate to often grab at, pet, and pin a child under the guise of roleplay. To be honest, I worry some of them use Reddit and will remember this. I tried to leave out too many extra details, and luckily my hazy memory probably worked in favor for this. TLDR, when I was underage, I played D&D with a bunch of men older than my parents, and they tried to force my character, a gay man, to be forced to be attracted to women, and then ended up using magic to force his body to change into a woman so that he'd still be gay. As my first experience with tabletop role-playing games, and now I'm just overly sensitive to being punished by DMs. Partially, I wrote this out and decided to share it to see if it was a pretty unusual thing to happen. I would venture a guess and say yes, this is a very unusual thing to happen and very, very, very bad. Like, oh my god, this might be one of the worst ones yet. Is it the absolute worst? Maybe not, but it is very, very close to the top of my list. This is just absolutely crazy. Now, let's discount any extremely creepy and bad stuff worthy of an FBI phone call that was not included in the story but simply implied, and just focus on what's happening in the game. First and foremost, this is clearly a homophobic DM with a homophobic group who have a very creepy attraction to the women in their party. Very, very bad. Playing with underage players is something that I think is okay. Do I recommend it? No, not for every group. I recommend most people play with groups around their same age. However, if you think you have the maturity to handle it, then great. But you do need to have the maturity to handle playing with people who are younger than you. You have to have some patience, some grace. And these people clearly didn't have either of those traits. On top of that, they had traits that are expressly negative and traits that, well, would probably land them in prison if exposed. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I'm qualified to handle or talk about these kind of situations. I'm smart enough to know that you need someone else. I'm a YouTuber. Please, if you are facing something like what this girl faced, talk to somebody. Talk to a professional. There are always people out there willing to listen. And with that, we are going to end today's episode. If you guys enjoyed this episode of RPG Horror Stories and want to let me know, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of my content, then please do check out the playlist in the cards. We have a 40-episode Tabletop Tavern Tip series where I give D&D advice, and while you're there, subscribe to Crispy's Tavern. And finally, if you want to leave your own stories or thoughts, go down to the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment turned straight with a question mark to let me know you made it to the end of the video. In essence, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.